Hello, hello. Happy Tuesday. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. My name is Demetria Miles McDonald. I'm the founder and CEO of Decide Diversity and the creator of the Table of Diversity. And today I want to talk about one of the three objectives of the Table of Diversity. Last week, if you were able to join me, I shared a little bit about the objectives of the Table of Diversity, and I'll put that up on the screen now. There are three objectives. So, one is to expand how we see and value people, how we recognize intersectionality, and then how we explore patterns of systemic disadvantage. And I plan to just walk through each of these because what I have found is that um, depending on where you are, your team, your organization, where you are on this journey, one of these three may resonate more than the other. And so I want to start off with this kind of foundational aspect of the Table of Diversity, which is expanding how we see and value people. And I kind of want to start by sharing a little bit of reflection. As we just celebrated Martin Luther King Day yesterday, and I was kind of thinking about the final, you know, movement of Dr. King's life and how he was really focused on the poor people's movement, and I think it was called the Poor People's Campaign, and it was this intersectional shift to really think about injustice through a multitude of ways. And I mean, we could really call that intersectionality, looking at it through a lens of socioeconomic status or economic status, looking at it through a lens of race, and trying to better understand how do those things intersect? How are the systems that we live in? How do they treat people who are at this intersection of identity? And then how can we ensure that as we are thinking about the work that we're doing, that we're not just thinking about it through a lens of just one type of identity, but we're really striving to understand, how does this impact people? How does this impact everyone? One of the things that I say often is, everyone can find themselves on the Table of Diversity. That's my job. That's as the person who updates the Table of Diversity. It is my role and responsibility to ensure that everyone can see themselves on the Table of Diversity. And in doing so, that means that we have to expand how we see and value people. And that is the foundation of the Table of Diversity. When I first started to create this tool 10 years ago, um, I could have just put race and gender identity, sexual orientation. I could have very much limited how we view diversity. But the idea behind it was all of the identities on the Table of Diversity might not rise to the occasion of having a, some sort of legislative act behind it where they need to be a classified or a protected class. Like race is a protected class, sexual orientation, gender identity, all of those things are protected classes. And so all the things on the Table of Diversity don't necessarily rise to the point of being a protected class, but they are still important nonetheless. They are important to who we are, to how we show up, to how we interact with others, to the policies we put in place, the programs we create, the systems that we create or that we're maintaining. All of these things play a role. Even things that aren't even on the Table of Diversity play a role. And so not only is it important as we are talking about diversity to include all of these aspects in that conversation, but as we are actualizing it, as we are operationalizing it, as we are going from awareness to action and facilitating impact, we also have to think about these other areas on the Table of Diversity. And one of the things that I always find interesting is, as I'm talking about the Table of Diversity, especially for those who have never seen it before, and I say, okay, what is your definition of diversity, right? Or they're saying, we need help with diversity. We don't have enough diversity. We don't have X, Y, and Z. I have to say, what are you calling diversity? Because oftentimes they have a very specific vision in their head when they're talking about diversity. It's usually race, might be gender identity, really just women. It might be disabilities, might be veterans, and then that's kind of it. But it's usually race. And so I have to ensure that as we are communicating, because we're talking about, diversity, that we're on the same page, that their definition and my definition are meshing. And when I talk about diversity, I'm talking about all of these things. When I talk about people, I'm talking about all of these things. There's a couple of things that happen when we are very intentional about how we talk about and how we operationalize diversity based on the table of diversity. One, we invite more people to the table. And I know because I hear it all the time, that there are people within your organization who do not feel like DEI is for them. They don't feel like they are benefiting from it. They don't feel like they are an ally. They don't feel like there's anything that is happening that is of benefit to them. And I know that that's categorically wrong, because DEI does benefit everyone, but we've not necessarily done a great job of helping people understand how DEI benefits them. So we bring more people to the table when we expand how we think about, how we see, how we make space for people through the lens of the table of diversity. Now, this is not to say that you can take what you're currently doing around DEI and apply the table of diversity to that. So, for example, if you have employee resource groups that are based on a couple of identities on the table of diversity, this is not to say go and create more employee resource groups on all the elements on the table of diversity, because that's unrealistic. My last count, there were 112 different elements on the table of diversity. I think it's just gotten bigger since my last count. So you can't have 112 different employee resource groups. Like, that just doesn't make any sense. And then also, if I'm thinking about, the intersectionality piece, we're not just one of these particular identities, we're all of them all the time. And so how do we ensure that we aren't simplifying DEI to the point where it's becoming ineffective? And the table of diversity helps us realize and recognize that there's some complexity to this. There's some nuance to this. And we have to better understand and recognize the complexity and nuance that's associated with diversity, so that when we get to the inclusion, when we get to the equity, when we get to belonging, it is more effective. Okay, so we bring more people to the table, right? Because think about it. If we are doing a great job of recognizing people of various ages, well, everyone is going to fall into that group. Whether you're a millennial, you're a boomer, whatever the case may be, there's something for you there. And I don't know that that's just one example. I mean, we could go to caregiver status. We could go to marital status. I mean, every single column on the table of diversity, there's a place for someone. And it's a great way to not only recognize the ways that they may be experiencing difficulties, or maybe experiencing marginalization or some sort of inequity, but it's also a great way to recognize the ways in which they may be excelling and showing up in their greatness. Again, it's the complexity and nuance of it all. But the table of diversity makes space for all of that. And so we make space for more people, but we also see more of people. We see more of the people who are around us. When we talk about diversity in a traditional sense, we talk about it in such a limited way that we're only seeing bits and pieces of people. And we say, bring your entire self to work. That's a popular DEI phrase. But then we're only recognizing certain parts of the person. And so I think the table of diversity really lives up to all the things that we say we want from DEI. And it helps us, it challenges us to operationalize it in a way so that we're not putting people in silos. We're not creating pockets of inclusion and equity, but we're really doing it in a way that is across the entire organization. So, when I know this, I get it. It sounds too easy, right? It sounds like DEI 101 that we covered 15 years ago. And in many instances, we did. We talked about all of these things, the very beginning of when DEI was first getting started. But here's what I know is, and it can be easy to skip over this part. It can be easy to skip over the expanding our definition of diversity and seeing more people more fully. It's easy to skip over that because it seems so elementary, it seems so easy, but it's the piece that gets overlooked and forgotten about. And some people they're not there yet. They're not there yet, because if you were just to rely on what you see in the world, then your definition of diversity might not include even the basics, even the protected classes. It might not even include that. So I highly encourage folks to always start with this particular objective. And once you get to this objective and you get through it, it may not take much time at all. I mean, it may take, a training or two, and then you're past it. But the idea is that you're getting everyone on the same page as we move forward in this journey. And sometimes what I think happens is we skip more advanced things about some of the, DEI 101 things. And the folks who needed that are like, well, wait a minute, what about me? Like, I'm not seeing how this impacts me. Or, like I was when I was studying for a PhD in industrial and organizational psychology, I was like, wait a minute, but you're only talking to a piece of me. What about the other parts of me? And so I think if we start here, if we start with really broadening the way that we talk about diversity, we will have a much more effective and efficient inclusion and equity strategy. There's a couple of things that my clients do to achieve this. One is they have a copy of the Table of Diversity. It's with them all the time. I mean, I have folks who will send me a picture of the Table of Diversity that they have hanging in their office, or in their cubicle, or it's in their notebook, and it's a 2019 version. It's from years ago that they had when I was with their organization, and they're still holding on to. And it's that visual reminder of, when I think about diversity, this is how I need to think about it. And I'll tell you, even as the creator of this tool, I still have it hanging up. I mean, I have it right next to me all the time as I'm doing this work, so that I can ensure that I'm not forgetting anything, that I'm keeping all of the identities in mind as I'm going through this work. And so having it as that visual reminder, it's just like your values. You have your values all throughout the organization. And it's not because it's there just so that it can look good, but it's to remind people, this is who we are. This is what we stand for. This is how we go about our day-to-day work. And the Table of Diversity, in its very simplistic form, does just that. The other way that my clients do this, and I was actually putting together some starter kits for an organization that ordered it for their employee resource groups. So the Table of Diversity starter kit is another really cool way. Let me see if I can. There we go. The Table of Diversity starter kit, I have to remember to unblur my background, is another great way to utilize the Table of Diversity, the resources and the tools. It comes with the What's Your Diversity Formula activity, which has a section that specifically addresses this particular objective. So if you're like, okay, this is a place that I feel like I need to start on my team or within my organization or my employee resource group, like, this tool has it all laid out for you. You don't have to figure it out on your own. You can do that. And because this organization, I'm going there to do some training on intersectionality. Their diversity Table of Diversity starter kit includes the workbook. It includes a poster-sized version of the Table of Diversity, access to some online training so that they can better understand it. And I'm including some of my favorite books. So I have Quiet, which I did in my book club maybe 2 years ago. If you've not read this book, it's Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking by Susan Cain. It's a great, great book. But again, expanding our definition of diversity, right? Like how often do we think about whether someone is an introvert, an extrovert, everywhere in between, as part of our strategies when we're thinking about DEI. And I think that that's another important aspect of, are we fully seeing people? Are we inviting more people to the table and really recognizing perhaps how our current organization may or may not be built in a way that makes them feel included, that makes them feel welcome, and that helps them thrive? And again, the table of diversity and its very simple form really reminds us and helps us to that point. So I'll put a link to the Table of Diversity Starter Kit in the comments so that you can check that out. It's also on the website. You can go to tableofdiversity.com. And then this book, Quiet, if you've not read that, I highly encourage you to read it. It's a book that I talked about in the book club, but it also came with, I don't know if it was in the book or if it was the online version. I can't remember. But it came with questions that you can ask yourself, that if you're doing this with a group, you can ask each other, almost like that book club guide. So it was a fully thought out book. But Susan Cain did a really great job of helping me understand the power of introverts in a world that can't stop talking. And I think that that's a really clever title. So again, the Table of Diversity, the very first objective, and I don't recommend skipping over this. I mean, you got to start here. It might not take you a lot of time to get through this first objective, but you got to start here. And the thought is, if you start here and you get to that next level in the journey, that becomes then part of the requirements for people that you bring in, right? Because you don't want to have to keep going back to this first kind of foundational aspect of DEI because you're hiring new people, right? The thought is, we are so advanced in how we approach this critical aspect of our organization, of our people strategy, of our DEI strategy, of who we are, that you not having this could be a deal breaker. You wanting to come into our organization and not having the skill set, not having this mindset of how we think about diversity in a more inclusive way, that could be one of the deal breakers. And so this foundational aspect of recognizing more people, inviting more people to the table, because we've expanded our definition of diversity. We have really expanded how we see and value people. We are recognizing perhaps how our systems of inclusion and equity may make life harder for them because of who they are, but we're also recognizing that they may be thriving in ways that we are unaware of. And we want the thriving to continue, right? We don't want people who are thriving today to not thrive. That's not the goal. We want everyone to thrive. And so we have to understand what's going well for people. We want to continue to go well for people. And then we have to understand what's not going well for people. And then how do we disrupt and change what's happening so that it can then go well for those people as well. So the Table of Diversity, it's a great place to start if you are at the very beginning of your organization, your team, or even your own individual journey. And then join me next time as I talk about intersectionality. And then the time after that, we'll talk about the systemic disadvantage and advantages. But all of these things can be an objective when we talk about the Table of Diversity. So depending on where your organization is, tune in, tap in. And this is a great place to start with the toolkit so that you can get the activity and the discussion post and guide so that you and your organization can really do this in a very meaningful and impactful way. One last thing about the starter kit. One of the things that I love, and I really tapped into my learning and development background here, is there's a facilitation guide. So yes, this is the facilitation guide, but there's facilitator tips. So if you have never facilitated anything related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, that is included in this. If you have never facilitated an activity, or if you've never facilitated a discussion, this is going to prepare you for that. It gives you not only the step-by-step things of what you can say, but it helps you when it comes to preparing and planning for. So thinking ahead, what are some questions that my team might ask? What are some objections that I might face? This helps you prepare for all of that. And so I utilize my background in learning and development to create this tool so that anyone on your team, not just you as the leader, not just you as the chief DEI officer or DEI professional can do this, but it's meant so that it can be an easy way to start having these conversations, start doing this work, continue doing it, and up-leveling each place along your journey. Hi, baby girl.
I want to see it.
Okay. All right. Well, mommy duty calls. My little one is sick today, and so I'll put a link to the Table of Diversity Starter Kit in the comments section. So if you want to check it out, you can also feel free to message me, and I'm more than happy to schedule some time to walk you through it, to learn more about your organization or team's individual goals and how you might be able to utilize this tool in your journey. But until next time, I'm Demetria Miles McDonald, founder and CEO of Decide Diversity, creator of the Table of Diversity, and I'll see you soon. Bye.